The 2024 NFL Draft could end up being a historic night for the Texas Longhorns Football Program.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we're discussing why the 2024 NFL Draft could be a historic night for the Texas Longhorns. 6 Texas Longhorns players currently projected to go in just the first 2 rounds of the NFL Draft. Then we have really good Senior Bowl quotes on T'Vondre Sweat and Christian Jones, 2 players who definitely elevated their draft stock over the past week in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl. And last but not least, tonight is a must-win game, in my opinion, for the Texas Longhorns basketball team. The number 14 team in the country, and Iowa State is coming into the Moody Center, and Texas needs to make sure they win this game to keep their tournament hopes alive. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So last week on an episode of Locked On Longhorns, when we got to talking about the Senior Bowl, right, we were talking about T'Vondre Sweat and Christian Jones and how they were performing at the Senior Bowl. I said, as we get further and further into the draft process, we'll get a ton of confirmation bias that this is one of the best and most talented teams we've ever seen at the 40 acres. Speaking about this 2023 team, right? We said that in the offseason, and then we got a ton of confirmation bias throughout the season, right? You go into, Alabama in week 2 and you win that game against a top 5 team on the road, right? Then you go 11-1 throughout the regular season. Your only loss is in a neutral site game to your biggest rival, right? In Red River against Oklahoma. We know anything can happen in that game. You win your first Big 12 championship since 2009, smacking Oklahoma State in the process. And, I've said it all off season. I'll continue to say it until we play our first game on August 31st. You were 11 yards away from the national championship game, right? And you were one of the 4 best teams in college football this year, according to the College Football Playoff Committee. So we got a ton of confirmation bias this season of how good this Texas football team was. But as we get further and further into the draft process, we'll get even more bias, that confirmation bias, that this was arguably, right, one of the most talented rosters we've ever seen at the 40 acres, right, period, right? I know it's definitely the most talented we've seen in over a decade, but like I said, arguably in the history of this program, one of the most talented rosters we've ever seen. So ESPN released their latest mock draft yesterday. Matt Miller, one of ESPN's most renowned draft experts, released a 2-round mock draft yesterday, and 6 Texas Longhorns are projected to go in just the first 2 rounds of the NFL Draft. Just more and more confirmation bias, right? And some context to that. Texas had 6 total first and second round picks from 2011 to 2022. Are you kidding me? The University of Texas, a blue blood football program, the state of Texas, 6 total first and second round picks from 2011 to 2022? And we're about to match that in one draft in year 3 under Steve Sarkisian? I don't know what's crazier, right? The fact that we only had 6 in 11 years, or the fact that Steve Sarkisian is about to do it in his 3rd year on the job in one draft, right? Some additional context to that. The Longhorns' all-time record for players taken in a single draft is 7 overall. All 6 of the players I'm about to mention that are projected in the first 2 rounds are locks to get drafted. The 7th player, Christian Jones, is a lock to get drafted, right? So we're going to match the all-time record for Texas that we set in 2007 with 7 Longhorns players drafted, right? We're going to match that, no question. Then you're looking at players like Jalen Ford, Jordan Whittington, and Ryan Watts. And I would think at least one of those players, possibly 2, and maybe all 3 would get drafted, right? So the 2024 NFL Draft looks like it will be a historic night for the Texas Longhorns and will set the new record for the amount of Longhorn players selected in one NFL Draft. So where are the Longhorns going, right? And before I get into where each player is projected to go, what team, and what I think about that particular situation, In the past, when I've talked about the NFL on this podcast, I have gotten some pushback, right? Not a lot, but I have gotten some pushback from people saying that they come to this podcast to, listen to me talk about the Texas Longhorns, right? And listen to me talk about college football, right? But I'm a huge football fan, an NFL fan. It's the off season. It's tough to come up with content, right? So I have to get in my NFL bag today and just give you that disclaimer now, right? If you don't want to hear anything about the NFL, even though I'm talking about Longhorn players being drafted into the NFL, then today's episode just might not be your cup of tea, right? When we look at the first Longhorn that is projected to go in Matt Miller's draft, we have Byron Murphy at the 16th overall pick in the first round going to the Seattle Seahawks. And I just think it's crazy, right? In 2021, Byron Murphy showed flashes. In 2022, he definitely started to put it all together. And then obviously, 2023 was an all-world campaign for Byron Murphy, All-American, scored touchdowns on the offensive side of the ball, right? Played fullback, and then won Defensive Lineman of the Year in the Big 12, right? And just was one of the most dominant defensive players in the country this season. And when you look at, this particular NFL fit, Mike Macdonald just coordinated one of the best defenses statistically of all time, right? With the Baltimore Ravens this year, one of the biggest reasons they were a number one seed. And, one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people thought the Ravens would get back to the Super Bowl this year. They completely shut out the Chiefs in the second half of the AFC Championship game and held them to 17 points overall, right? So we don't see too often teams holding Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes scoreless in an entire half of football. And we definitely don't see too many times where the Chiefs can only put up 17 points, right? Even though their offense wasn't the same as we're used to seeing this year. If you would have told me going into the game that Lamar Jackson only had to score 18 points, I would have said the Ravens are going to be in the Super Bowl, right? So definitely not putting this loss on Mike Macdonald, and definitely not putting this loss on the defensive unit, right? He did a hell of a job this year, and that's why he landed a head coaching position with the Seahawks. And last season under Macdonald, Justin Matabuke was an all-pro at the defensive tackle position, and now Byron Murphy could potentially fill that role on Seattle's defense under Mike Macdonald. And really, when you look at it, this is a team that was built when they were at their best, going to Super Bowls, winning Super Bowls. They were built on the defensive side of the ball, right? Shout out to forever Longhorn Earl Thomas, right? But they really haven't been great, especially on that side of the ball, since the Legion of Boom, right? And I get the sense that they want to get back to that level of physicality and play an elite defense in Seattle, right? And what better way to do that than to bring in a physical freak at the defensive tackle position like Byron Murphy? His athleticism, his physicality, his bursting quickness, his ability to wreck things in the run game, and his pass rushing upside with 5 sacks last year in the middle of the defense make him almost a lock to go first round. And I think that would be an amazing situation for him under a great defensive mind in Mike Macdonald in Seattle. I think they could get back to playing really good football in Seattle, and Byron Murphy would be one of the biggest reasons why. The last pick of the first round, so I guess they're projecting the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl on Sunday. Is Xavier Worthy, right? They have Xavier Worthy sneaking into the first round, and I definitely could see this, right? With the way he could possibly test and, what he could do at his pro day, he could definitely, with his speed and quickness, could, find himself into first-round conversations. When you look at it, the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes have made the Super Bowl the past 2 years without Tyreek Hill, but the offense hasn't been nearly as explosive as it was prior, right? So, you could definitely say that, the Chiefs have been just fine, right, without Tyreek Hill. But to say they don't miss him, a top 5 receiver in the game, probably a top 10 overall player in the game, I think is a stretch, right? They've been fine without him, but I definitely still think they miss a playmaker like Tyreek Hill, especially because when you look at it, they had one of the worst receiving cores in the NFL this year. They led the National Football League in drops, and they also cost the Chiefs a few games, right? Kadarius Toney, one of the biggest head cases in the league, lined up offsides against the Bills, negating the game winner that he scored, right? The Bills ended up winning that game in the regular season. And then Valdez Scantling, can't remember his first name at this point. I think Marquez Valdez Scantling dropped a go-ahead touchdown against the Eagles. That was another game that the Chiefs lost in the regular season. So they need help in terms of their receiving core, even though they're about to play in the Super Bowl on Sunday, right? Xavier Worthy might be the fastest player in the draft and is a threat to score from anywhere on the field, also adding value in the return game. I think he's an underrated route runner. The way he gets in and out of his breaks, the way he uses his feet makes him, a really good candidate to be a star player at the wide receiver position at the next level. He's not just a burner. He is not just a speed receiver. We saw that for 3 years at the 40 acres. And as a third option behind Travis Kelce and new wide receiver one, Rashee Rice from SMU, with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid pulling the strings, there likely is not a better scenario for Xavier Worthy to begin his career. So Matt Miller in his latest mock draft has Xavier Worthy and Byron Murphy going in the first round. After a quick word from our sponsors, we get into the 4 players he has going in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a dub, or two, or three. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, so we're getting into the 4 players that Matt Miller has projected to go in the second round of the NFL draft from the Texas Longhorns. And we're starting at number 38, the Tennessee Titans, Adonai Mitchell. And what is crazy to me is at 33 overall, they have Ladd McConkey from Georgia going ahead of Adonai Mitchell. This is no disrespect to Ladd McConkey. I think he's a hell of a receiver, right? And he showed, at the Senior Bowl and the last few years at Georgia, right? In one-on-one coverage, he's a nightmare, right? He's really good at getting open. But to say he should go above Adonai Mitchell, or to say he's a better wide receiver prospect than Adonai Mitchell when he can't even play on the outside is crazy to me, right? But, obviously Matt Miller's forgotten more football than I'll probably ever know. So who am I to question him, right? I'm wishing I was in his position, right? All right, when you look at it, number 38 in the second round, so a high pick, still in the second round, Tennessee Titans, Adonai Mitchell. Titans have a young quarterback in Will Levis who needs some weapons around him to help his growth and development, right? We know young quarterbacks, what's crucial for them is great offensive line play and, great weapons to distribute the ball to. And at this point, I'm not sure that Will Levis has any of those, right? The Titans will also probably be losing his best weapon and, a security blanket of some sort in Derrick Henry, and his 2 best receivers aren't enough to win in today's version of the National Football League. Treylon Burks was a first-round pick out of Arkansas a few years ago, and he's just yet to live up to being selected into the first round. Hasn't been that #1 wide receiver that Tennessee has been looking for. And DeAndre Hopkins was, serviceable at times last year, but he's 32 years of age and looks like he's starting to, be on the decline moving forward, right? So they need to bring in some playmakers for Will Levis, and Adonai Mitchell is a hell of a playmaker, right? He could easily step in and be their #1 wide receiver with his huge catch radius, his ability to make contested catches, and his knack for tracking and making deep ball catches consistently. In my opinion, Adonai Mitchell is a true wide receiver 1, right? What you look for in your best wide receiver, Adonai Mitchell is that, right? And I love the T. Higgins comp because I think that's exactly what he brings to the game, right? He could be a T. Higgins type player at the next level. I don't love the fit with the Titans, just being honest, right? They still seem to be a few steps behind the curve in terms of modern offense. There's so many teams in the National Football League right now who are using their quarterbacks and wide receivers. And I would hate for Adonai Mitchell to have to start his career in an offense that's playing 3 yards and cloud of dust football, right? So, obviously going to any NFL team is a blessing, and I think Adonai Mitchell could step in day one and be their #1 wide receiver. I think he's that good and that talented, but I definitely would like to see him in a system that has a better history of utilizing their quarterback and utilizing their wide receivers, where I feel like that Tennessee offense is just going to be a lot of scoring 17 points and hoping their defense can lead them to a victory. So I think Adonai Mitchell could end up in a better situation, going into the National Football League, but he's also the type of player to make Tennessee a better situation himself. Next is 49th overall in the second round, Cincinnati Bengals, Jatavian Sanders. And as much as I don't like the fit for Tennessee and Adonai Mitchell, you have to love this fit with Jatavian Sanders with the Cincinnati Bengals. When you look at it, after going to the Super Bowl 2 years ago and losing to the Rams, the Bengals have lost in the AFC Championship and then missed the playoffs in the 2 years since. So they're, chasing that 2021 season and getting back to the Super Bowl. And a player like Jatavian Sanders could definitely move the needle in terms of getting you back to the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow is one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. I think unquestionably a top 5 quarterback in the National Football League right now. And Jamar Chase, in my opinion, is unquestionably a top 5 receiver in the National Football League. So you have a really good foundation in terms of the offensive side of the ball. They also have had, right, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Joe Mixon. Not sure how many of those 3 players are returning next year. Probably Tyler Boyd. I would see T. Higgins probably finding a new team because he's going to win a big deal. Not sure what happens with Joe Mixon, but the Cincinnati Bengals will be really explosive on offense next year without Jatavian Sanders. And you add him, and that just gives you a completely different dynamic to that offense. What Joe Burrow has lacked, really going back to LSU, I think he had Thaddeus Moss at LSU, but Thaddeus Moss is not Jatavian Sanders. And I would say the best tight end he's had in the National Football League is Hayden Hurst. And Hayden Hurst is not Jatavian Sanders, right? He's lacked the dominant player at the tight end position. I think Jatavian Sanders is a perfect fit for this offense because of his athleticism and his ability to spread out the defense on the outside and in the seams. He's essentially, another wide receiver on this football team, but that can play as a tight end in line and blocking as well, right? Zach Taylor is from the Sean McVay tree. And the tight end has to be able to block, which JT Sanders did at a high level at times at Texas. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be Rob Gronkowski in terms of being a blocking tight end or Mercedes Lewis or anything like that. But to act like Jatavian Sanders is a liability when it comes to blocking is just simply not true, right? And I think he's going to bring a ton of versatility to the Cincinnati Bengals offense if he lands in that situation, which I think is perfect for him. So you have a great offensive mind in Zach Taylor. You have an elite quarterback, and you have dominant weapons around Jatavian Sanders to take the pressure off of him, right? And he's, of course, going to be a mismatch problem against linebackers and safeties. If you have to defend Jatavian Sanders as a fourth or fifth option, look out, right? Like I said, the Cincinnati Bengals have been chasing the Super Bowl appearance for the last 2 years since they lost to the Rams, and a player like Jatavian Sanders can certainly move the needle and get you back into that conversation. At 54, another great fit that I love, Cleveland Browns with T'Vondre Sweat. Matt Miller's doing a really good job of growing on me, right? I've almost already forgot that he put Ladd McConkey over Adonai Mitchell. Cleveland Browns, T'Vondre Sweat, love this fit, right? The Browns had one of the best defenses in the league last year before completely falling apart in the playoffs against the Texans, right? And I know the interceptions by Flacco didn't help, but when you look at it, this is a team that fielded Deshaun Watson at quarterback. They fielded Joe Flacco at quarterback. They fielded Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. I think they played another one, right? So they had 4 quarterbacks play this year and still won like 10 or 11 games, right? Like that's a testament to how good the defense was. But the interesting thing was the Browns had the best defense at home, but arguably the worst defense on the road, right? And if you watch that playoff game against the Texans, that did not look like the best defense in the league by any stretch. But they were playing on the road, right, against the Houston Texans and C.J. Stroud, who looks like a young superstar in this league. The Browns already have superstars really at every level of their defense, right? Of course, Myles Garrett, who I think arguably is the best football player in the league, period, right? Linebacker, they have J.O.K., who's a dominant force. And then at corner, they have Denzel Ward, right? So they have dominant superstar level players at every level of their defense, right? The front, the middle, and the back end. They also have a huge need at defensive tackle because they have 3 defensive tackles scheduled to hit free agency, right? Which makes, T'Vondre Sweat not only being a great pick in the second round for just anybody who needs a great defensive player, but especially for a team that's losing 3 defensive tackles to free agency, right? And you could potentially add another superstar up front to go with J.O.K., Denzel Ward, and Myles Garrett in T'Vondre Sweat, right? He can definitely help in the run game. I think there's no question about that. But I think scouts are asleep on his pass rushing upside. Like I said, these scouts have forgotten more football than I'll ever know. But I've watched every game T'Vondre Sweat played at the University of Texas. And I think to say that he won't be a great pass rusher at the next level, or he can't figure out how to be a great pass rusher at the next level, maybe I'm biased, but I think that's really short-sighted, right? He had 22 pressures in 14 games last year and has an entire career ahead of him to improve. And I think he'd be going to a great situation playing next to, Myles Garrett in terms of developing, T'Vondre Sweat into being one of the best defensive tackles in the league. So I think this would be a steal for the Browns. Like I said, I'm not buying all this talk about T'Vondre Sweat being a 2-down player in the National Football League. I think he's a dog. I think he'll be dominant in any situation you put him in, and you add him to a defense like that. And look out for the Cleveland Browns, right? I don't even rock with Deshaun Watson, but if he, turns into anything decent like he was in Houston, and they get T'Vondre Sweat on defense, once again, look out for the Cleveland Browns. That might be their division moving forward, even with the Bengals and Ravens in it. Green Bay Packers at 58. So we're getting to the end of the second round, but still in the second round, Jonathan Brooks. Now, this one is interesting because I just didn't see, the way that running backs are being devalued. A team taking, a running back, especially a running back coming off a torn ACL in the first couple of rounds, right? But Matt Miller seems to believe that Jonathan Brooks will be a second-round pick. And like I said, he's likely forgotten more football than I'll ever know. Matt LaFleur came up under Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, who, Kyle Shanahan obviously came up under his dad, Mike Shanahan. So there's a huge emphasis on running the ball in Green Bay, right? I know they've had Aaron Rodgers and they've had Jordan Love, but if you watch a Green Bay Packers game, right, they still want to run the ball at a really high level and then, base everything off of that. A lot of motion, a lot of play action to, trick the defense. And in any level of football at this point, right, unless you have Christian McCaffrey, you need 2 running backs, right? And your Green Bay Packers have one, and they have a really good one, but who's going to be their running back 2 next season? Matt Miller seems to think that it could be Jonathan Brooks, and I think that would be a really good fit. So Aaron Jones from Texas, still one of the best, most productive running backs in the National Football League, but A.J. Dillon, his rookie contract has expired, and he's scheduled to hit free agency, right? So not sure if they're going to bring back Sorry, my internet's cutting up, so I had to pause it. But I think what I was saying is that I'm not sure they're going to bring back AJ Dillon, right? Having to pay him a second contract would make a lot more sense to just draft a running back, in the draft, right? Or take a running back in the draft, especially with the production we've seen in recent years for running backs coming out the draft, right? I mean, I guess the best example is Isaiah Pacheco, a 7th-round pick starting for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? So, Jonathan Brooks definitely could be a prime candidate to be running back 2 next year for the Green Bay Packers. And I think eventually, because Aaron Jones is making like 12 million a year, and that's a lot for a running back in today's game, that, they could eventually move off of him, and then Jonathan Brooks could slide in as the number 1 running back for one of the, most storied programs in sports, right? The Green Bay Packers, which would be great. And I think Jonathan Brooks' vision, patience, and ability to change speeds give me full confidence in him being a game changer at the next level, right? We also saw at the University of Texas that he's really proficient as a receiver as well. So I would love to see him go to a team that could potentially use a starter right away. I know the Cowboys, the Titans, the Texans, those are just teams that come to mind right now that need a running back starter. But obviously, like I said, going to the National Football League is a blessing wherever you go. And I think he would be going to a really good situation with a great offensive mind and Matt LaFleur and a team that wants to run the ball at a high level and has shown, especially against my Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs, that they can run the ball at a high level. I think Jonathan Brooks will be a great fit there. Before we get into a word from our sponsors, I want to read two quotes. One about Christian Jones and one about T'Vondre Sweat from the Senior Bowl over the past week. I think 2 players from Texas that really did a good job of elevating their draft stock in Mobile, Alabama. Would have liked to see Byron Murphy, but he was dealing with a late season injury, and it looks like him not participating in the Senior Bowl won't matter, right? Because pretty much every mock draft I see at this point has him going as a first-round pick. So this is Christian Jones. Among those who finished out the week, Texas's Christian Jones may have been the most surprising. Jones entered the festivities as a well-known prospect after starting 3 years for the Longhorns. But the inconsistency seen with his technique throughout his collegiate career should have served as a detriment when facing the best in Mobile. It didn't. Instead, his pass sets were mostly consistent. Jones used his length and size to shut down most of his opponents. He had one of the most impressive performances as a result. And T'Vondre Sweat, the 6'4", 362-pound nose tackle, had his share of movement. Sweat started the week slowly, only to turn it on during the American squad's Wednesday and Thursday's practice. Weight concerns will always be at the forefront for Sweat, who didn't officially weigh in this week, but a fully invested version of T'Vondre Sweat is like having a freight train in the middle of a defense. He mauled opponents with his size and strength and even flashed a few pass rush moves. Are you listening, Cleveland? Right. So like I said, a ton of confirmation bias throughout the season of how talented this Texas roster was in 2023. And now as we go through the draft process, even more confirmation bias that this is one of the most talented Texas teams you have ever seen. Yes, you on the 40 acres. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, getting out of here with my 5 keys to beating the number 14 team in the country for the Texas basketball team tonight. Iowa State is coming into the Moody Center. I've said I believe that Iowa State tonight and West Virginia on Saturday, both games at home, are must-wins for the Longhorns. One, because you're one of those teams that is currently being discussed on the bubble of making the NCAA tournament or not. So every win moving forward is huge. Every loss moving forward is huge. Also, I think, these 2 games are very, very winnable games for the Texas Longhorns, especially at home. But after that, your 4 remaining games in the regular season are Kansas State, who just knocked off Kansas last night. Kansas, right? U of H once again, who you lost to, and Texas Tech once again, who you lost to, right? So it's very pertinent that you make sure you get victories against Iowa State and West Virginia this week. My 5 keys: start fast, keep the crowd involved, right? You can't start slow like you've done the past few games, right? And I know that, this is a great second half team. Ronnie Terry does a great job of making second half adjustments. But I think the key to beating a team like Iowa State, who's really good, is to really use the Moody Center as a home court advantage, right? But the crowd has nothing to cheer for if you're down 10 to 15 points and you're clawing your way back in the game. I think if you jump on Iowa State early, get this crowd involved early, that could take them mentally out of the game and make it a lot tougher for them to perform at a high level with that raucous crowd environment that the Moody Center can be when Texas is playing their best basketball. Dylan Dessou and Max Abmas have to be superstars. There's no exception. There's no other path for this Texas basketball team to win. For them to win every night, Max Abmas and Dylan Dessou have to be superstars. To beat Iowa State tonight, Dylan Dessou and Max Abmas have to be superstars. That's the only path for Texas to win. Sorry, you don't have the luxury of taking a night off. You don't have the luxury of taking an off night. Dylan Dessou and Max Abmas have to be great tonight for Texas to have a chance to win. Kendall Weaver and Tyrese Hunter need to be lockdown defenders against Lipsey and Gilbert. They're 2 leading scorers at the guard position. Kendall Weaver starting is a great adjustment by Rodney Terry. It gives you a dog on the defensive side that can guard their best player from the opening tip, right? And I think Kendall Weaver do that. And Tyrese Hunter, even though he's inconsistent on the offensive end, he's still one of the best defensive guards in the country as well. So I think if they can come out and play lockdown defense against Iowa State's 2 most prolific scorers, that'll go a long way into ensuring victory for the Texas Longhorns tonight. Dylan Mitchell, after a bad game against BYU where they weren't even guarding him, right, and triple teaming Dylan Dessou, he's had back-to-back double-doubles against the University of Houston and in a win on the road against TCU. So I think he needs to bring that energy on offense and the boards tonight. Not saying he needs to have a double-double. That's just an arbitrary number. But I think if he shows a lot of effort in terms of rebounding and scoring tonight, he'll be a great third option for the Longhorns and should give them the boost to beat Iowa State tonight. And my last key to victory is Brock Cunningham and Caden Shedrick need to shine in their roles, right? Like I said, Brock Cunningham, no more, no less. He needs to defend, shoot open threes, and rebound. And tonight for Texas to win, he needs to make open threes, rebound, and defend at a high level, right? And Caden Shedrick, when he's spelling Dylan Dessou, right, he needs to come in and still provide some offensive capability, right? Getting easy shots around the basket, but also provide that, all-American defensive player type of, defensive player of the year type defense he provides when he comes into the game, being an elite, rim protector and shot blocker. So Brock Cunningham and Caden Shedrick, even in auxiliary roles, need to shine in their roles to make sure that Texas gets a victory over one of the best teams in the country and definitely one of the best teams in conference, Iowa State, tonight. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.